Welcome to Political Fallout Shelter, the only defense podcast that's brave enough to come to you from a basement deep beneath the Capitol, surrounded by U.S. Capitol Police and security officials. I am Leo Shane, Deputy Editor at Military Times. If you're coming back and listening to us again, thank you so much. Please tell your friends, please tell your family, please tell your mom and any three-star generals you might know about our podcast. And subscribe to us. We're on Google Play, we're on iTunes. Our producer Ben has told us if we don't get 1,000 subscriptions soon, Joe's not allowed to leave our bunker down here, and he has to stay all day. So, speaking of Joe, my co-host, Joe Gould, Capitol Hill Bureau Chief for Defense News, and the foremost expert on defense appropriations in the Marvel comic universe. Joe, how are you doing this week?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing lovely. Look, I know you were looking forward to the podcast this week because you thought we were going to do 2.5 hours on the Eagles' visit to the White House. You've been walking around your Nick Foles jersey. I know this has meant a lot to you, but sadly, Eagles did not make it. They were uninvited by President Trump after
I might have heard.
Yeah, after none of them said they wanted to come. So a little bit of an issue there. But some folks who are going to be in D.C. this summer are the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell announced this week he is canceling the August recess because there's so much work to do. That includes nominations, blame Democrats for taking too long with those, but includes a host of other appropriations issues, budget issues, and the defense budget and the defense authorization bill, finalizing that and getting it done. So since lawmakers are going to be here in August, that's a process that usually drags all year, and now they're going to be done in September. Like
Boulder Dash.
Well, no, he said that's why they're staying. They're clearly going to...
The heck you say. No, it's not going to happen. Sorry. But the House isn't going to be in session. All of these major, anything major that's gone on here has taken, bicameral negotiations. The armed services committees typically meet over the summer or the big four representatives after their staffs hash out sort of the minor issues. The major issues rise up to what they call the big four. The Republican and Democratic leadership of each of the armed services committees. Well, how are you going to have those big four meetings if the House isn't here, right?
So you're saying that this might not be to actually get work done? There might be political reasons behind this?
Yeah, it's been widely discussed that there are vulnerable, what they call red state Democrats, Democrats in the Senate, in states that Trump won, and this denies them some kind of crucial campaigning time. And look, the folks that I talk to up here feel like the issues that are going to be dealt with are, largely non-consequential.
It will be interesting to me if the Senate recess, and we should point out that last year McConnell made similar promises that they would work through August, and ended up being 1 week in August, and then they all went home. They all went back to their districts. But it'll be interesting to me to see, since it's usually very quiet, since lawmakers aren't here in August, when those behind-the-scenes negotiations on defense budget and defense authorization bill and all of these things are going on, we get drips and dribbles, but not a lot of headlines, because frankly, a lot of the stuff we get is from senators blabbing about it, senators walking around. So if they're here, it'll be interesting to see if we get a little bit better picture of how those negotiations are going. Are there issues that are popping up? Are there things? Is this something that may accelerate or may decelerate? But,
yeah.
But I don't, like you said, I don't
want to give the impression that I don't think that lawmakers should be working hard and that we shouldn't be taking, every opportunity to figure out what's going on behind the scenes of the budget negotiations. I hope that they use the time wisely.
Yeah, but unlikely that it actually moves any of these timelines, and that when we get to September 30th, we're done with any of these big budget issues.
I don't know. I feel like the big deadline is going to be the election, and I don't know. I just feel like Republicans. Do you think if they're going to come to some major deal on spending, Republicans are going to want to vote right ahead of an election on like a $1 billion? Except no. They've ironed out spending for this year, so it's unlikely that they're going to have to take a vote like that. What we're seeing is that the Republicans are trying to get like a rescissions package done,
right,
where they claw back some money from the bipartisan deal. That said, they do have to vote the individual bills. You're right. They do have to vote the individual
But as you
appropriations
said,
bills to handle the nitty gritty of after having ironed out the top lines, they have to, iron out where the money goes.
and as you said, the House will vote on some of those, but the Senate's not going to go full bore on
No.
theirs, so we still have the back and forth.
Yeah.
So we're still back here in September dealing with the same stuff. So,
Yeah.
listen, another issue that you've been tracking this week on the Senate side, especially related to the Defense Authorization Act, is this issue of tariffs. And I want you to explain to our listeners, but mostly to me, why the Defense Department is suddenly involved in a trade war.
Yeah, well, okay. So just to kind of take us back in time a few months, the president announced a 25% tariff on steel, 10% tariff on aluminum, on the countries of on Mexico, Canada, Europe. Our relationship with Mexico is a little testy right now, and but
heard a few things about a wall.
But Europe and Canada are America's allies, and there's been some work going on behind the scenes to try to ramp this down, but it didn't come to fruition. And on June 1st, the president announced that they were
these are all trade issues. These are why is the Defense Department in this conversation?
Well, I mean the defense, the business of defense is geopolitics, and we have look, the defense industry relies on exports, and imports in these countries is overseen by the government in a major way. And hey, if we're gonna create some ill will, maybe they're gonna decide. Maybe these, Germany is said to be considering the F-35. It's a huge amount of money, and if we're not acting in a friendly way towards them, maybe they decide to go another route. If the scales are going to tip one way or the other, that's one example.
And it's worth noting in this that part of the justification for these new tariffs from the White House is that it is a national security and national defense issue. So that further confuses this whole thing of, does the Defense Department want it then? Do they not want it? How does this affect the relationship with allies?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the Defense Secretary Jim Mattis has tried to stay out of the president's way on this, and he was asked. There's like a NATO defense ministers meeting, and on the way to that, he was asked, and he said, "Well, this is it might be a little bumpy," but he didn't think that the defense relationships were going to be deeply impacted. And there is that argument out there that our defense ties are too strong to really get rocked by, we're too deeply intertwined with our NATO allies to be deeply rocked by this issue of tariffs. And then on the flip side, to your earlier question about, why should defense care? The defense industry, I mean, ultimately these tariffs are likely to raise prices on steel and aluminum domestically, and as an analyst that we've talked to have said that as the defense firms' stocks of steel and aluminum fall, they're going to have to start buying the more expensive steel and aluminum. Well, guess who is the major the major customer for defense equipment, for tanks, for ships, for jets? The American taxpayer. So there's a criticism out there that this is gonna raise prices on us.
Okay, so where are we? There's talk in the Senate that they're looking to put some sort of limits on these tariffs or some sort of restrictions on what Trump's doing with them as part of the defense authorization bill debate that's going to come up on the floor next week. But now we may or may not have amendments.
It's a cloudy picture. So the Bob Corker, who's the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has spearheaded legislation that would grant Congress the ability to vote on tariffs on retroactively, like 2 years, and but there's a hitch. There are two hitches actually. One is that Republican leadership does not want reportedly does not want to allow this measure to come to the floor, because it would create a Republican splitting vote. It's basically Republicans defying the president, free trade Republicans defying the president. On the flip side, where we sort of last left the NDAA, Rand Paul wasn't going to be able to get a vote on an amendment of his, and as a result, it looks like he could object to any amendments being just because of the arcane rules of the Senate.
And
one senator can kind of hold up the whole show.
Yeah, we've seen this in the last few years where there may be some pretty non-controversial amendments that folks want to put on the authorization bill because it's one of the few trains that always gets through. But one or two senators will object and stop them from being attached, and then we end up with a measure that doesn't have a lot of that stuff. So something we'll be tracking closely, and something. Something that remains pretty cloudy. So let's talk about burn pits. Once upon a time, you used to work for Army Times, and you talked about people instead of companies, and people instead of equipment. But you and I have both been aware of the issue of burn pits for a number of years. It's having a moment again in Congress right now, and I've been writing about it this week. It's really interesting to see something that I think both of us have been aware of suddenly coming back into the public consciousness. So for listeners who aren't aware, troops who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, often in remote outposts, but even in larger bases in Bagram and in Baghdad, would use just giant pits to dump all their waste, pour jet fuel on it, light it on fire, and get rid of all this stuff. And now we're seeing 10 years, 15 years later, some pretty serious health ramifications from that. Folks who have developed rare cancers, rare bronchitis, all sorts of respiratory illnesses. I spoke to an individual yesterday who had his second double lung transplant, which is the kind of thing that you just don't hear about. It's just that I asked him, and he said no one's ever had three, but he may be in line to be the first one because the health issues still continue. Wow. So really interesting that lawmakers are now saying, look, this is another lingering VA issue, another lingering veterans health issue that we've got to address, we've got to get into, and really hasn't had much resolution of late.
Yeah, advocates are sort of saying this is this generation's Agent Orange, but they don't want to have to wait 30 years for it to get addressed, and they're saying that the government needs to acknowledge this and deal with it quickly. Because people are dying.
Yeah, and that was the issue with Vietnam. There was suspicion about Agent Orange, but a lot of time was taken to do research, figure out what presumptive illnesses they are. Hey, if you served, you were near Agent Orange, and you got these kind of cancers, or you got these kind of specific, odd illnesses, we'll give you VA benefits. We'll recognize that immediately. But that took decades to do, and now we've got a generation of post 9/11 veterans who are saying, we don't want to wait until the 2030s to start addressing these issues and to really start helping these folks.
But is it that help me out because you know way more about this than I do, but what's the government's sort of official position on this, that it's unclear that there's a link between burn pit exposure and the kinds of illnesses and the sort of my second question is it doing anything to study this issue and study it fast?
Yeah, so that was the big deal this week. There was a House Veterans Affairs Committee hearing where they were essentially posing those two questions at VA folks and at veterans organizations. So what are they doing? What are the links that are known? Part of the problem is each of these burn pits was its own thing. So in some they were burning just office waste, papers, feces, things like that aren't good but are one set of problems. In other places they would burn things like batteries, plastics, things that put really dangerous toxic chemicals into the air. So it's tough to say if you serve near a burn pit what you may have been exposed to because it's different for each one. So a lot of the federal research so far has had trouble pinpointing specific illnesses. You may find somebody who's got a rare lung cancer, but that doesn't, it's so rare that you would have been exposed to these sort of things, but they don't know what was in the burn pits, so it's hard to say. So there are a bunch of studies going on. The VA is providing health care to a lot of these folks as veterans who served honorably and are eligible for that. But the catch becomes the the recognition of what caused it, and veterans benefits. So since there's not a established link between burn pits and a set of illnesses, you can't go and say, well, I was next to a burn pit, I now have this sickness, I should be 100% disabled. So that becomes a rub for folks who, while they might be getting the health care they need, can't work, can't go outside and breathe. One of the gentlemen I spoke to this week said he's got low-level skin cancer because of this. So anytime he goes outside, he's exhausted, he's in pain. That's not conducive to living your life.
So there's like a higher tier of benefits that they would get access to if only the government would acknowledge that this is like a service-connected, that these are service-connected illnesses.
No, exactly. And a lot of lawmakers are saying now, look, we've seen enough evidence, we've seen enough cases that you don't need a specific, this chemical being burned, this issue being burned results in this illness. There's a broader idea of, if you have any set of unusual illnesses, why aren't we just giving you benefits saying it's probably connected to burn pits? We can see that.
Did the recent action or did the hearing seem to you to like tee up any future legislation? I know that that Brian Mast and Tulsi Gabbard have some legislation that's aimed at burn pit registries. To me, I didn't get the sense that is like a super strong piece of legislation to redress the issues for these guys. But maybe there's something more to it than I'm realizing.
No, so yeah, I talked to Representative Mast, and there's another bill too from Representative Ruiz and Castro that again is dealing with allowing family members to input their loved ones' information in the registry. Again, not really getting at the issue, but sort of talking about it. But what all these lawmakers said is just bring the issue forward, just bring it into the consciousness is their first step, and then they're going to look at how do we address benefits, how do we get people talking, because right now they feel like it's just a forgotten issue. That at one point, people, when we had the war going on, people knew there were sicknesses coming back, and now, 8 years later, 10 years later, people have just forgotten that there are long-term health costs to war.
Is that like an interim step? Is that enough to satisfy some of the advocacy organizations? There's like a Burn Pits 360 is a new advocacy organization.
Yeah, and the advocacy groups right now are happy that it's being talked about. Yes, they want to see more, but their first step is let's get Congress talking about it. Let's have a hearing. The fact that there was a hearing. There obviously wasn't a direct result, but it was a big deal to have these questions, big deal to have VA come in. DOD didn't come in, and there's a lot of angry lawmakers saying, why aren't we getting more information from DOD on what they've done, what they've learned, and what they know?
Were they invited and they didn't come?
It's a whole other thing that we'll get into about, and we've seen this a couple of times, but DOD decided they were going to transmit their stuff, and it's interesting the different committees they come to and who they'll appear on committees with, and I think there was a feeling that if DOD was going to come, they wanted to be, if not the only witness, a witness with other federal witnesses, other government officials, and not outside advocates where there may be actual sparring. So, look, before we get going, one other issue I wanted to touch on this week. Actually, I wanted to touch on it last week when we had Val here, but I was afraid that if we talked about Top Gun 2 with Val here,
you're going to say.
If we talked about Top Gun 2 with Val here, it would have been a 2-hour-long podcast that we never got out of. So, all of defense
Which
Twitter,
we might do.
All of defense Twitter is talking about Top Gun 2, which is spectacular, bringing one of the most popular military movies of all time back to the public consciousness into the 21st century. Joe, tell me how excited you are about Maverick coming back.
Not much. I'm an outlier when it comes to this.
Joe,
In terms of defense Twitter, I'm an
outlier.
outlier.
How to have fun.
You know what? It's not fun to me. It's I think that as a child of the 80s, I have continuously seen my my nostalgia mined for profit, and I just okay, good, all right, go to the well, guys.
Joe, there are important lessons that new generations need to learn from Top Gun. Here.
Like Val Kilmer should retire from acting.
Well, that's one.
That's not fair to Val. I'm sorry, that's not fair to Val Kilmer.
No, I think it's probably fair to Val Kilmer.
We need a reboot of Batman Forever.
Batman Forever.
He was, and you know what? He was great in Tombstone. We need to reboot Tombstone.
Look, this is a whole different. This is what we've heard all of our colleagues talk about. Think of all the different platforms that can be highlighted here. Think of all the new things. Think of the fact that the entire plot could revolve around a giant sky penis. Like, what do you want out of a movie more than that?
I don't know. I mean, what's Maverick been doing? all this time?
There's-
Well, we've been in Iraq and Afghanistan flying fighter jets against who?
There's a whole host of questions about his promotion schedule. There's a whole host of questions about what VA benefits he's eligible for. Maybe he was using his GI Bill benefits while he was in this. These are all things that are worth mining for a new generation that is crying out for more fighter jets.
Maybe a new generation, but not me.
Listen, we'll be tracking that all week long and all of these other issues. You can follow all of our stuff at militarytimes.com and defensenews.com. And you can follow us all week on Twitter. I'm at Leo Shane.
At Reporter Joe.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.